Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to our Peace and Interfaith panel today. My name is Mehnaz Ladha, and I am a Talent and Org Development Coordinator with NBC Universal, as well as co-founder and Executive Director of Operations with the Sahifa Foundation. Today, I will be moderating today's session and joined by our esteemed panelists, Sayyid Hossein Qazwini and Shaykh Faiyaz Jaffer. But first, I'd like to introduce them formally. Sayyid Hossein Qazwini has studied at the seminaries Karbala and Najaf, and he has a number of publications on topics like Islamic law, jurisprudence, and the science of biography. He holds a bachelor's in Islamic studies from UC Berkeley. And Shaykh Faiyaz Jaffer has also studied at the seminary in Karbala. He is currently the associate chaplain and research scholar at the Islamic Center at New York University. He holds a master's degree in Islamic studies with a concentration in early Islamic history. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
So our topic for today is both timely and paramount to our continued success, not only as a community, but also part of larger society. And so initially we wanted to frame the conversation by rooting it in the Quranic perspective, but I see that Sayyid Hossein Qazwini might have some technical difficulties. So first I'd like to pivot and turn to Shaykh Faiyaz Jaffer. You know, interfaith in the context of religion can often equate to the idea of tolerance and kind of coexisting without causing too much conflict. So Shaykh Faiyaz, would you be able to share some light in terms of how we can have positive, meaningful interactions instead of divisive debates?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that we live in a world that is, seemingly driven by a lot of polemical rhetoric. And oftentimes we see ourselves kind of in a very polarized climate on two unique sides of the spectrum. So in the context of, maybe the last 8 years plus in the United States, for instance, there is, this ongoing conversation of Democrat and, Republican. And you're on one side of the spectrum politically, you're either conservative or you're liberal and so on. And I think when we sort of hone in and really focus our conversation in regards to interfaith, interreligious engagement, there's that same ability and potential naturally as well to kind of fall toward one side of the spectrum, either we're into this or we're not into it. And then at the end of the day, like, what's the objective? And I think that kind of in doing this work, it's really, really important and imperative to kind of, again, focus upon what are those ultimate objectives of engaging with the, someone from another community. If the idea is to create some sense of meaningful dialogue, great. But oftentimes what we see from, interfaith and interreligious engagement is that, the culmination of it ends up in having, like a cup of coffee with somebody else and like eating some cookies, but, without any sort of meaningful experience. I think that if we're starting again by re-strategizing what our purpose is and the ultimate objective of interfaith engagement, because no one's asking anyone to kind of give up their religious ideology. No one's asking one another to kind of give up their ultimate beliefs. We have certain beliefs and we have certain convictions. And we want to stick with those principles. We believe in God, we believe in the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, we believe in the Imam of Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them. We should never feel that me entering into a state of dialogue or engagement with anyone else is necessarily giving up those things. So I think that's kind of the most important aspect of it, to kind of re-strategize and restate virtually our objectives of what the purpose is. And I think from there on, we can find a lot more meaningful conversation. If that makes sense.
Thank you, Shaykh Faiyaz. I think you definitely set us up nicely in terms of what our conversation today will consist of. But Sayyid Qazwini, I'm happy that you're able to join us with no difficulties, hopefully. And so let's backtrack for a minute and let's try to root this conversation into interfaith in Islam through the Quran. So as you may know, one of the common misconceptions about our faith is that there's little to no room for diversity of thought. Those who differ from us, whether it be in their ethnicity, language, or religion, should be considered outcasts of society. But we all know that this is not true. So Sayyid Hossein, how does Islam recognize, encourage, and celebrate that diversity, particularly within the Quran?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى الطيبين الطاهرين. First of all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to our dear host, Sister Mehnaz, and to my dear brother and friend, Shaykh Faiyaz Jaffer, and to whoever is watching us from all across the world. First of all, the Quran celebrates diversity amongst human beings. Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. O people, we have created you from a male and female. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ إِلَى لِتَعَارَفُوا, made you into tribes, clans, so that you may meet one another. The Quran is celebrating these differences. It celebrates the diversity in our race, in our nationality, in our tongues. Allah says in another verse, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُم. From amongst His signs for you is the creation of the sky and the earth and your various tongues, meaning languages, and your various colors. This is one of the signs of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah is showing His power and strength through our diversity. So this is something celebrated in the Quran, and this is something that we should celebrate as well. It's not a source of disagreement, but a source of unity. It's a source of celebration. لِتَعَارَفُوا, and we have created you in different clans and tribes, different races, different languages, so that you may meet one another, so that you may complete one another, so that you may understand one another and help one another. لِتَعَارَفُوا. The purpose of this diversity is that we may work together and understand each other and complete one another. So this is something that should be celebrated as it is celebrated in the Holy Quran. We see that the Quran, when it comes to interfaith, we see that in several verses in the Quran, the verse starts as قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ, say, O you the people of the book. And this is a beautiful expression. It doesn't say, O you Jews, or O you Christians, or O you those who don't believe in what we believe. No, O you who believe in a book, and we believe in a book. So we're starting with what we have in common. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ. And this verse is so beautiful, the one that I'm about to recite. And if we, those who believe in interfaith and believe in interfaith activism and work in interfaith, if they take this verse as a motto, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. O you who believe in book, O the people of books, come and let's agree to not worship other than Allah. And that's what we have in common with the people of the book. Starting, we have in common the Quran is on this. I'm running out of time, but the Quran celebrates, encourages interfaith. The Quran encourages dialogue of faith religions in a peaceful manner, in a civilized manner.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the Quran is always a guiding principle in our lives. But we also know that we can look to the lives of the prophets and the Imams and look at how they interacted with people from all different walks of life. So Hossein, I'd like to ask you if you can share some examples about how these personalities approached this topic back when they were alive, and what kind of lessons we can learn and maybe apply in our lives today.
When we look at the lives of Ahlul Bayt, we see nothing but respect for followers of other religions and other faiths. One day Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting with a group of companions. A funeral passed by. Rasulullah stood up out of respect for the corpse. They told him, Ya Rasulullah, this is the corpse of a Jew. He said, so what? But he's a human. I respect him because he's a human. Rasulullah was giving us a lesson that it doesn't matter whether he's a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim. I respect him as a human being. We all know the famous hadith by Amir al-Mu'mineen, who said, people are of two kinds, either your brethren in faith or your counterparts in humanity. One day Amir al-Mu'mineen had a guest, a Christian guest. When he left, he walked him to bid him farewell. He told him why. He said, because this is what we believe in our faith, to respect. One day Amir al-Mu'mineen was in the desert walking with a Christian. And when they were about to depart ways, Amir al-Mu'mineen walked with him with the Christian friend towards his journey for a couple of steps, and then he returned back. He told him why. He said, because this is what Islam teaches us. Even if it's a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim. He said, this is the ethics and morals of prophets. And when you look at the lives of all the other Imams, you see nothing but respect and honor for people of other faiths and religions. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, one day, a Zoroastrian was mentioned in an ill way in the presence of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. Imam Zayn al-Abidin said, no, don't say this. Don't say this. Every religion has its own form of marriage. That person made an ill remark regarding that person's lineage. You said, no, don't say this. For in every religion, there's a form of marriage. So Ahlul Bayt exhibited utmost respect and akhlaq towards people of other faiths and religions.
Great, thank you so much. And Shaykh Faiyaz, with that understanding of how our prophets and imams live their lives, and I'm sure there are ample examples in addition to what has been shared already, but can you provide some best practices for navigating these conversations in the 21st century? You mentioned it earlier. We live in a very divisive, very hostile world where people are typically trying to find ways to argue. So in this context, what can people do to have a meaningful conversation? And if you can elaborate a bit more on that goal that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that that's Sayyid Hussein, he was a lot more eloquent in his explanation than I, but just to pick up where he left off. Again, starting with this understanding of mutual respect as the foundation and the guiding principle, not only of the way that we engage interfaith engagement, but the way that we engage engagement with people in general, right? Because these issues of divisiveness and of kind of falling on extremes in conversations is a problem that we find within our own communities as well. And I think it's an important aspect for us to start off with that foundational principle. The verse of the Quran in chapter 16, God states, "Udu ila sabila rabbik bil hikmati wal maw'izati al hasana wajadilhum billati hi ahsan." It says, call people to the way of your Lord by being wise, bil hikmah. And some commentators of the Quran have defined hikmah as knowing when to speak and knowing how to speak. Wal maw'idat al-hasana, and virtually using beautiful language, for lack of a better definition, lack of a better translation. So I think if we're starting off with this idea, calling people to the way of God, what's the way of God? Other than, the names and the attributes that he describes himself. Bringing people toward mercy, bringing people toward justice, bringing people toward compassion, bringing people toward the ultimate and most sublime qualities and values founded within community and society, that every single human being, whether you're a theist or non, embraces. Everyone loves justice, everyone loves beauty, everyone loves love, everyone loves these sort of foundational qualities or sublime sort of qualities. And I think, again, if we're starting with this, maybe ayah of the Quran as a model again in approaching, then we bring people toward those most purest of qualities and values. By knowing when to speak, knowing how to speak, bil hikmati wal maw'idat al hasana, and by speaking, politely, in those famous anecdotes between the Imams of Ahlul Bayt and those who may have spoken poorly to them. For instance, in that famous narration, which I know that is often sort of also narrated, on our pulpits, a man comes to Imam al-Baqir and he speaks to him poorly, and without, getting into the whole details, the Imam would respond to him by telling him that, if what you say about me is true, then may Allah forgive me. And if what you say about me is false, then may Allah forgive you. How can, when someone speaks to you poorly and you respond like that, it's the end of the debate, it's the end of the conversation, and at the end of the day, this man, he comes and he states, that I believe that there's no God but God, and that Muhammad is his messenger, and that you are the representative of God on earth, because you've demonstrated by means of your akhlaq, right? You've demonstrated by means of your etiquette. So again, I think, without getting into so many details, because I think the question was partially answered by Sayyid Hussein prior to mine. When we start off with that perspective and that view that we want to have respect for one another, we want there to be positive outcome and engagement, and maybe we'll talk about it later. But at the end of the day, what is the strategy kind of beyond the interfaith engagement and dialogue that we're enduring, or that we're aspiring for? When we know that we're working toward a common goal of making difference in our local communities, grassroots, society, so on, there's that much more opportunity for growth.
That's great. And that kind of leads me into my next conversation. You know, many of us can recount a time in our lives where we've been engaging in a conversation where there's a form of proselytization. You know, people are trying to convince other people to convert that my religion is correct, your religion is wrong. And in the context of interfaith, Shaykh Faiyaz, how do we really reconcile that and make sure that we're having a conversation? And we touched upon it already in terms of having that meaningful debate, having that right intention. But more so, how do we avoid trying to tell people that their religion is wrong and that Islam is the true message? Because we are constantly encouraged to spread the word of Islam like our Imams and prophets that came many years ago, and we're doing it today. So can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, for sure. I want to go back to that verse that was mentioned earlier as well. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالُوا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ, right? That when God commands the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to communicate with the Jewish and Christian communities, he states, God again states, قُلْ, say, يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ, O people of the book, تَعَالُوا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ, let us come toward a common word. Let us come to a common understanding. So when you focus on commonalities before speaking about differences, this is again like the ethos that God commands the Prophet ﷺ to engage with in terms of other faith groups. So for sure, I think a lot of people they kind of have lost the boat in terms of understanding why interfaith engagement is meaningful, because naturally it's very hard to kind of decipher or reconcile between proselytization of faith and engaging in conversation, in meaningful work. So I would say that focusing upon those common values, right? For instance, over here in New York City, there in the last year or so, there have been a whole host of unique challenges around COVID-19 and the pandemic. As most people know, New York in March and April was heavily hit last year, upwards of 30,000 deaths, many of them in our communities. What we began to see was the number of those impacted oftentimes fell on minority communities, Muslim communities, the African-American population, the Hispanic community locally in New York City, meaning financially they were out of work, there were more mortalities, more illnesses, for a whole host of different reasons, many a times due to socio-political circumstances and so on. And what we decided to do, our institution, the Islamic Center at New York University, along with other faith groups and communities, was figure out a way to utilize our common core values of doing good to our neighbor, right? At its most basic foundational principle, or just being good people, to gather together and figure out ways to, raise money or to support people, vulnerable and isolated communities. And we learned this, right, from Imam Ali ibn Hussein, Zain al-Abidin, who's known for his worship, but at the same time, who's known for his service to community in the darkness of night. We talk about Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, we talk about how he was the caretaker of the orphans and the widows, in addition to him recognizing his justice and his valor and his bravery and his courage and battle and his ibadat and prayers and stuff. I think that, we have to go back to those principles of Ahlul Bayt, whereby they also were those who were the first and foremost in front of, the orphans and the widows and the most isolated and marginalized within their communities. And just over here, our center, across sort of Sunni-Shi'i divide, and then even more so over the last year, we've been able to raise more than $3 million, right? Which I think is really, really remarkable. And, I'm blessed and privileged to be a part of that. But it starts with this idea of focusing on our shared values without, segregating on the basis of differences, but still remaining firm toward our religious ideology. We may get inspiration from different traditions, spiritually, from different figures, Ahlul Bayt or otherwise. But at the end of the day, we're working towards something that is needed and that is valuable at this moment in this community today.
Absolutely. And it emphasizes that shared responsibility we have to this conversation, that should be a guiding principle in everything we do. And so as I move on to my next topic, I'd love to get your perspective on a very historic moment that'll be happening later this week. Pope Francis is set to make his first ever visit to Iraq, where he'll meet with the Grand Ayatollah Sistani. So Sayyid Hossein, how significant is this moment in Islamic history, and have we ever seen something like this before?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This moment is extremely significant because We have never had in the history of the Pontifex, in the history of the Vatican, where the Pope had come himself, not a delegation of priests or fathers. No, he himself is to Iraq, number one. This is historic for Iraq. And number two, to the city of Najaf, and to meet with the top scholar of Shia Islam, the top marj of Shia Islam. This is extremely significant because it has never happened before. Of course, we all know that this Pope Francis, he's special. He's different from his predecessors in his humility, in his public relations. This will be extremely significant. Why? Because first of all, it's going to bring, Najaf is already on the map. People have of Najaf, but it will more so come on the map. Shias have been neglected. Shias have been abandoned and ignored for so many years. Their rights, their political rights, their religious the religious persecution that has taken place against Shias for centuries, even in countries where they are the majority, like here in Iraq. In Iraq, Shias have gotten some of their rights in the past 2 decades. Otherwise, here they are the majority. They have always been run and ruled by the minority. So Shias have always been the underdogs. They've always been booted. No one has given them their rights. We hope that this visit by the Pope, which is a very important meeting, it will bring back Shias back on the map, bring back Najaf on the map. We'll realize the significance of Shiism, the significance of the Marja'iyya, the Grand Ayatollah, who has played a very, very important role in the stabilization of Iraq, and not just Iraq, but the entire region. Iraq was on the verge of going into a civil war. Shaykh Faiyaz knows this. He was in Iraq for at least 2 years. And I remember he lived in those turbulent years. Iraq went through very turbulent years. It was on the verge of civil war. But yet Sayyid Sistani, with his wisdom, he stopped that civil war. And, on the topic of interfaith and intrafaith, he issued a fatwa of not harming any Sunni cities and harming any Sunni individuals, and he put a rest to that history, to that chapter of Iraq, that bloody chapter of Iraq. This visit will be extremely significant. Will help bring harmony and understanding between Catholics. Even in our beliefs, there's some beliefs that are believe, for example, in the intercession of the Virgin Mary. We believe in the intercession of our Imams. There's a lot that we have in common. There's a lot to understand, and I hope that this visit will be the start of something very, very beautiful between these two faiths, Islam and Christianity. There's already great work done, but this will this will be the epitome of the Muslim-Christian relations, inshallah.
Yes, it's definitely a moment that's significant to both Muslims and non-Muslims, and all eyes will be on it. Shaykh Faiyaz, I'm curious though, do you think that this will kind of help break down some of the Islamophobic attitudes that run deep in our society? And do you think we'll ever see the reverse, where a top scholar, maybe Ayatollah or someone else, take that step to do the reverse? Maybe somebody will be visiting Pope Francis at the Vatican.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, as for your first part of your question, I think that would be, I think that's the goal. I think that would be wonderful. And I certainly hope that that's the case. Obviously, this meeting is very historic and momentous, and it has that, it has an awful lot of potential to kind of shatter a lot of misconceptions. Again, probably not founded amongst, senior leadership of their respective traditions, because I think there's a lot more understanding, but how it impacts kind of the grassroots communities at the end of the day, when, the Shia community sees, the top scholar of the world, being an engagement or engaging with with Pope Francis, someone of his stature and someone of his presence. Hopefully, it will kind of motivate or give that inspiration, to the local communities to kind of reach out perhaps to their Catholic counterparts across the United States or otherwise, and kind of see ways that we can continue to work together and build strategy. And I know I mentioned this term earlier, but I didn't really define it. I think that what does that strategy look like? Again, working, if it's reaching out to your local church or to a local student organization on campus between Shias and Catholics, for instance, based on what we see from our religious leadership, I think it's important that maybe we start to engage and figure out ways not only to learn about one another, because learning in itself has a lot of benefit, and reading a book or a book study, whatever, but more than that, again, how to make impact socially, like on the ground. So is there homelessness in our city? We need to work toward combating that. Is there issues and concerns of domestic violence founded within our respective communities? What are things that we can do in terms of building the institutions that are meaningful toward impacting them? Again, we focus upon the leaders, the inspiration that we gain from our leadership, and see how that emanates kind of thereafter. As for your your second question, I think we've seen a little bit of engagement before about many Shi'i scholars visiting the Vatican, and I hope that certainly continues, because that's what we need from our teachers and from our leaders, and it's important that not to sound disrespectful, but I think that it's really, really important that we're working toward communicating with the office of our respective maraja, so that they are kind of coming to the forefront and doing things like that, usually holding them accountable or asking them or kind of explaining to them how that might impact or influence things on the ground. I know Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi did so. I think in 2015, 2016, he visited the Vatican as marja. I'm not sure if there were any others, but perhaps the Vatican previously has visited other holy sites, like if I'm not mistaken, they visited Qom in the past, but I could be wrong about that. But I think that focusing upon this particular occasion of Pope Francis coming to visit Najaf, visit Sistani, I think that's a huge step in the right direction, and I hope that it's only the beginning of dialogue and engagement.
Yes, we'll see after next week for sure. But with the final few minutes remaining, I'd like to ask both of you this next question, and please take up to 1 minute to answer. Sayyid Hossein, I'll start with you. What is your hope for the future of interfaith relations, and what first steps might our audience take to get us there?
Allow me to say that we have a lot of shortcomings when it comes to interfaith engagement. We as a Shia community, we have a lot of shortcomings. We are engaged, some maybe in the UK, some in the US, but overall we still lack. And I think that our communities, the ones that are active in the community, those who sponsor events and sponsor programs, they really need to pay attention to interfaith work. I think our communities have not understood the importance of interfaith work. When there was the Muslim travel ban just 4 years ago with the president at the time, who stood for us? It was the interfaith community. It was the churches and synagogues and others that came out to support Muslims and stood by the mosque and supported us. So if our communities don't realize the significance and importance of interfaith work, we won't get anywhere. We have to make awareness, create awareness in our communities that this work has to go forward, inshallah.
Great. And Shaykh Faiyaz, in 1 minute, what is your hope for the future of interfaith relations?
Yeah, my hope is, that it goes again kind of beyond the symbolic sort of gatherings that often take place. It's not about, faith leaders or community leaders to kind of get together, like take a photo, put it like in a newspaper somewhere. I think that's useful and it's beneficial sometimes, but I think at least kind of in the United States, it's happened so often that it kind of gets played down in terms of the impact or potential that it has to make impact. So what I would, ideally like to see, inshallah, is, that we can get together and again strategize about ways that we can make a difference in our respective and local communities, focusing on commonalities, but at the same time respecting the fact that we believe what we believe, and that we it's not about converting somebody. It's not about proselytizing my faith. I believe and I have the convictions that I do. Now, how can I utilize what I've learned what my religion teaches me to kind of be at the service of oftentimes the most vulnerable, respectively, locally, in our respective society.
Well, thank you both so much. That concludes our panel for today. And I'd like to thank you both once again for joining us and sharing pearls of wisdom on this great topic. But I'd also like to encourage our audience not to let the conversation end here. We need to bring this topic to whether it be our dinner tables, our conversations over Zoom with family and friends, our neighbors at the church across the street. We need to keep continuing having this conversation so we can see real impact and change in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much.